Coach Teeden, we are back. What's up, man?
We are back, and it's summer season. You can tell by my voice, right in the middle of camp week. But I had to do this podcast today because it was a must get. This is a whale for us, and super excited to get into.
Yeah, this is one. Yeah, before Billy, before we get into our guest, I just want to tell our listeners, and I had to change it today when I released our podcast, that as we know, Billy is no longer the head basketball coach at Plant City High School, but he's like, I don't know what's next for me, and I'm going to sit it out. Well, within a few months, he's now an assistant coach at Florida College. Billy, congratulations. That got announced and has been going all over the place. But our guest, Doug Lemov, who many of our listeners, I hope, I know me, and as I always say, most of this content is for me and Billy, but I have been studying his work for a long time, and I got pages and pages of notes from his book. Many people know more of Teach Like a Champion, but he's also works with sporting teams and teachers and different things. And I loved it. I listened to a podcast, and he said he likes to go by his methodology advisor. I want to welcome Doug. What's happening, my man? Thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I've been looking forward to it as well. So, my lack of basketball knowledge will reveal itself quickly, but I hope that I'll be able to add some value some other way.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, we're teachers first, and studying different coaches, whether it's John Wooden and how he worked, and just any coaches now and how coaching has changed. And I know you work with attacking sports, and so that's where we'll get going. So, Doug, how are you wired?
That's such an interesting question. I think the two things that I would say is I think that I'm happiest when I'm learning. So I guess you could say that I'm wired to learn. I kind of have to build my work life around the idea that I feel like I have to always be figuring stuff out, which I think is ironic because if you ask my wife about me, she would not say that, I'm the kind of guy who's always figuring stuff out figuring stuff out around the house. But in other areas, that's how I'm wired. I think the other thing, honestly, that I'm wired for is just wired for family, which is the most important thing. And I think that's a lot of behind the work that I do in teaching and in sports, which is just, thinking about people and their families and trying to help them to develop and thrive and become the best people they can be.
I love that answer. Happiest when learning. So how has your learning style changed as you've aged?
That's a great question. I think we were talking about this a bit before we came on, but I think writing is a big part of it for me, which that I often find myself not sure what I think. It takes me, I think, a long time to make up my mind. This is always challenging for me in school, that oftentimes you'd be asked to have an opinion right away, or often when I watch classroom teachers, sometimes you read something and you ask a student, well, what is your opinion about what should have happened here? Or, what should the president have decided to do? Or what should this character decide to do? And my answer usually is, it's way too early. I don't know yet. So I think I'm a slow decider, and a lot of that comes through like a deliberate process of writing and trying to write it and then saying, well, that's not exactly what I think. And like, what do I mean by that word? And, which I think is interesting because one of the things that worries me about education is the way that reading and writing, I think, are, they're changing and they're losing in a death struggle against technology and the smartphone. And I do think there's something unique to the slow, like one of the great things about writing is how slow it happens. You talk at 150 words per minute, you probably write it. If you're me, 10. I can show you a really beautiful video that I have of a kid in a math class where the math teacher says, write down your thoughts. Why do you think? How do you explain whether these two lines are parallel? They write for 30 seconds, and she calls on this kid, and he starts to talk, and he talks about how the two variables are, or two lines are coincidental, but he says it like that, coincidental, almost like a question, right? This is clearly to me the very first time that he's used this word. Right, he's acquiring new knowledge, and you can really only do that when you're going slowly. If she'd asked him to answer verbally at 150 words per minute, there's no way he would have used this new piece of vocabulary, this new concept that sometimes we need to go slow to incorporate ideas. I don't know if I think there's some kind of analogy for that in the sports sector as well, which is like things that I ultimately want to do fast, I have to start to do slow. I have to have to slow down the process if I want someone to wrestle with a new idea. So, yeah, that's
I love that answer. It's kind of interesting because when you think slow and you put slow with learning, it's like a negative connotation with that. Like, and that's a bad thing. But ultimately, though, we do need time to gather our thoughts. And it's funny you bring this up. I had a kid at camp yesterday. You could tell he was struggling with this question. Or, he was gathering, but it ended up being a really, really good question once it was said. But I could have easily been dismissive and like kind of moved on.
Yeah.
But it was, you know what I mean? It was giving that opportunity.
To equate slow with slow, right? That's slow means takes your time, and slow means, not the most capable. As you were thinking, I was thinking about my daughter. She's about to enter her senior year in college as a collegiate soccer player, and she's had a really successful 4 years. I think a lot of her coaches who she had when she was young would be surprised by that, because she was slow physically. She was just late to grow, right? And so, I think a lot of her coaches were looking for fast and athletic, and she wasn't those things. But she also was the kind of kid who had to understand. And sometimes I would literally say to my wife, like, I think that she runs just fast enough not to get to the ball because she doesn't know for sure what she's going to do when she gets the ball. And so she'd almost rather than be wrong, she'd rather be almost right and not quite get there. I was talking to her about this, and she was like, maybe there might have been something to that, where it's just like, I was the kind of kid who needed to really think it through and really know what I thought before I was able to be decisive.
So much to unpack there, because and I've told this story before, like I related to when I was coaching a 5-year-old soccer team, and I was using words, I think that, or I figured out, not I think, I
like
know.
Left and right?
Well, push up or whatever, like you're saying, like go, run, or, you're just, they don't know what direction. So they're just running around. And you think about it as you go through school and you're on your team and a freshman comes in who, has some ability or maybe not ability, but they don't know what you're saying. So you have to go slow to define the words to say, all right, when I say strong side, weak side, this is what it means. Because maybe a coach never told you that as you came up through, because you're just playing games. You're not so much working on your craft or doing the learning. You're just like, hey, 4 o'clock, I'll see you there. 6 o'clock, I'll see you there. And so much to unpack with that. And my daughter too, sorry, I'm going through a bunch of thoughts, but we went to a middle school volleyball meeting and she's in 6th grade. And you just look around, you're like, holy moly, there's no chance my daughter can hang in this, right? So you're like, well, she's not experienced enough, and it's really crazy, but not sure where I was going. I just throw all that out at you. So
a couple of things jump out at me because it's so interesting. One is there's this cognitive science principle called the curse of expertise, which is the more you know about something, the less obvious to you it is why someone else wouldn't understand, or all the things that someone doesn't understand about it. That's especially true with concepts and vocabulary, right? When to a 5-year-old, when you say, get back, which possible back, like back towards my goal or back towards their goal or back towards the sideline that I came from when I got on the field, right? Like, you just don't, it's so easy not to understand all the things that other people don't, that learners don't understand, but also especially with terminology that, sport is so full of vocabulary that people assume that you understand, and often it's really poorly defined. That, like, one of the things I think is most important for a sport team or a sport club to do is to just try to standardize vocabulary as much as possible. Just to tell you one more story about my daughter, she played for a really good soccer club, and she had a coach one year who talked about receiving the ball side on, which is receiving, like, you're standing sideways to the path of the ball, so you receive it with the outside of the oncoming foot, so you can go left or right. It preserves optionality. So the next year she had a coach who talked about receiving the ball on the half turn, and those are exactly the same concept with different names. And it was halfway through the year when she was like, we were at dinner, and she's like, what's the difference between receiving side on and receiving on the half turn? Which means that, like, she had spent half a year not even connecting everything that she knew about one thing to the other because her coaches were just using different names for things. And how often coaches are, stay connected, be in the channel, be wide, like, what percentage of players understand what you mean by that, especially when 15 different coaches might mean 15 different things by be wide. So I think standardizing vocabulary is really important. And then really like, a lot of really good coaches like to define their own terms, right? As soon as we have a term that is in standard usage, then people are hearing definitions of the term on my team that don't align to my definition. So I don't really control the definition anymore. People think that they're talking about the thing that I'm talking about. We're actually not. So Jesse Marsh, who's a great soccer coach that I've worked with, he's the Canadian national team coach now. He's like, one of the things that is remarkable about his coaching, he's like obsessive about vocabulary of like, let's give a name to the things that we value tactically, technically, culturally, but let's give them our own name. Because one, I think when you speak a language, that defines you as part of a culture, right? Every culture on earth is like, you believe that you're French because you speak French and other people speak French, and that language is what makes you feel part of something. So I think there's like a cultural piece of it. But then like everything that they want, they have a special name for that they control as a team. And so I think it just builds confidence and understanding in players in a way that is just so easy to overlook.
It's my biggest struggles as a coach. You come up with this play, and what do we name this play that's just unique to us? And then it can, I don't know, I struggle with that so bad because I want the kids to tell you, this is our play, our language. But then it's a hard time of not identifying it with something else. How do you like what does a coach need to do to get there?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I think, names are such an interesting thing. One of the things I don't know if this is helpful, but one of the things I've just been reading about is how stories are cognitively privileged, that we remember things better when they're encapsulated in a story. I think in part, like, this is probably going deeper and geekier than you want me to. But
Not me.
evolutionarily, okay. Well, like, so evolutionarily, before there was written language, like, we communicated culture and knowledge through stories. Like, we sat around campfires, and like, it is required to survive as a human to know how to make fire, but we don't have an instinct to make fire. Most animals, to be able to do something is required for survival. They have an instinct for it, but humans don't, which means that we have to, in order to survive, we have to acquire through knowledge. We have to acquire knowledge of complex multi-step behaviors that are more complex than we can understand in the first iteration through communication with other humans. How do we do that? We tell stories about it. So one, we tell stories about it. And when we sat around campfires listening to stories, the people who listened well to the stories were like, oh, these not only communicate important information, but these bond me with the other people around the campfire. Those people survived. And the people who were kind of only half listening were like, oh, that story probably wasn't very important. They're gone. So I think we evolved to like bring special meaning to stories. So like Jesse Marsh, when he introduces a concept, often tells a little story about it. So a psychological concept that I know he told me about using with his players is he calls Roger Bannister. Like, you probably know the story of Roger Bannister, the mile runner. He broke the 4-minute mile. People thought breaking the 4-minute mile barrier was impossible for humans to break. And after he broke that barrier, like 3 more guys broke it in the next year and a half or something. Which like, so he told the story to the guys, and he was like, okay, so what this tells us is that your perception of your limitations is the barrier, and that if you disbelieve in the limitations that people tell you about, you can do great things. So when you're exhausted and at the end of the game and you think you have limitations, remember Roger Bannister, right? So he tells the term Roger Bannister. There's like a little story with it that goes like, this is our story, and that I think helps people to remember it. So if I'm trying to go back to where you're like, how do I name a play? So it's like important and memorable to us. I think I give it a little story, right? This is going to be, this is going to be our like, it's going to be our knife play, right? It's going to be our way to like, cut to the center of the issue, to like cut away all the gristle around, whatever it is. I'm trying not to get maybe not too worried, but I think explaining it a story tells people that it's important. It helps them to remember something about it, and again, it just reminds them that they're part of a culture.
Well said. So let's. You have so many different ideas out there in print and online on teachers and how to make their classroom and how they can act in a classroom that is conducive to learning with different types of students. I know you have Coach's Guide to Teaching out, and many people have read it, including myself. But for our listeners, like in your mind, so we're going to schedule out a practice or a lesson. What seems like a good way to structure a practice to be ideal for learning?
That's a great question. I think the first thing I would want people to understand is that there are two phases in learning, two phases in what I would call transfer, which is we talk about something, you come to understand it, and then you become able to use it later in thinking or a playing setting. And so I think the two stages, the two things that happen are the first stage is encoding, which is I have to understand what you want me to do. So Billy's got a new play, it's pistol grip, and I need to understand like what my role is, where the screen happens, why the screen happens where it is, what I'm doing off the ball. And that's one important part of learning. But the second part of learning is retrieval, which is this is somewhere in my brain, and I learned it in practice, and now standing on the court a week later, 3 days later, 6 days later, 2 weeks later, with pressure on and someone shoving me and my parents shouting on the sideline, I have to find this memory, and I have to find it in a fraction of a second. Because if it takes me a second and a half to find it, that's too late. I have to instantaneously know it. And so encoding strength and retrieval strength are different things. And when players forget, it could be an encoding problem. I never really understood where I was supposed to be on this play. Or it could be a retrieval problem, which is I couldn't really find it fast enough under pressure. And so I think that that's important because I should design my training differently. Well, I should design my training so there is both encoding and retrieval. And I should design differently for encoding and retrieval. And I should recognize that retrieval is vastly overlooked. Retrieval is basically about forgetting, which is, in the book, I share a forgetting curve, which is like what happens to information when you stop actively thinking about it. And the answer is you forget it. People forget it very, very quickly. And so at the end of practice, we've run the play. It's in people's working memory, my players' working memory. They've been actively thinking about it. We can run the play pretty well. And I think they've got it. They understand it. And then 6 days later, we try and run it in the game, and like everyone has forgotten. And I'm like, what's wrong with them? Don't they care? Don't they want to perform? Are they not paying attention? Are they not motivated like we were when we were kids? And the answer is they forgot, because that's what the human brain is designed to do. And if I want to wire for retrieval, I have to bring the concept back into players' working memory, their conscious thinking, after a period of delay, after a period of forgetting. So one of the first things I think is really important to do in a practice, like let's say we spend the first half of the practice, we're learning something new. I'm teaching my players a set of like inbound plays or a set of screen plays. We're talking about shot selection. I want to go pretty slow there. I want to make sure that they understand it. But once they understand it, I'm really only a fraction of the way to their being able to use it in the game. Retrieval strength has to be really strong. So I need to bring that concept back after a period of forgetting. And I can bring it back for a very short period of time to build retrieval strength. That means that at the end of, let's say we did at the beginning of practice, we did some other things. At the end of practice, I might be like, great, set up pistol grip. Let me show me what that looks like. Let's see it now. And players are going to struggle to remember because they'll have been distracted by other things. And that struggle to remember is what encodes the memory. And then the next day at the beginning of practice, I should be like, 2 days ago at the last practice, we talked about pistol grip. Set that up for me now. Let's see us run it. Go. Right. And again, like it's hard to remember it. Players will get it wrong. They will be less successful than if you ran it 8 times in a row in the one practice. But that will begin encoding it. And then 3 days later, again, I need to be like, set it up. Let me see you guys do it. And then I think there's almost nothing the players can learn durably in one interaction, that they have to do this retrieval follow-up over a course of certainly days and probably weeks. And then the other thing that I can do is if like I'm under time pressure and have to learn something, but we need to use it, against, our crosstown rivals on Saturday and it's Tuesday, that I should do a lot of what we call interleaving, which is, I think like blocked practice is good for encoding, which is we're learning something new. I should do multiple repetitions of it with small variations so players understand like what is the concept, what's good, what's bad. They need to have a deep, rich understanding of it. But when I start working towards retrieval, which is once I understand it, I have to find it quickly under, using the right cue under pressure, then I think I do it. And then I go away and I distract players with something else. And then I come back and make them do it again, because the forgetting that happens when I distract them is the thing that builds retrieval strength. So I think that's like, to me, that's one of the most overlooked things I'm learning. And if I'm designing a practice, I'm thinking about designing, especially for retrieval, but also being clear in my mind. Am I designing for encoding or am I designing for retrieval?
I've used the words you've used before in different interviews. I know you were on Chris Oliver, I believe, Basketball Immersion at one point. I always use it. I must not, if you mess it up, I must not taught it well enough. So, part of that encoding, because if I don't encode it, they can't retrieve it. But what would you say, probably the most successful, winningest coach right now is a guy at a Division II school in Florida at Nova Southeastern. His name's Jim Crutchfield. Every day he goes into practice with his plan and he walks out the door, he crumples it up and throws away and says, that'll never happen again. Like, so we're doing all this retrieval and encoding. Is there, and interleaving, like, is there, how can we do anything to kind of help with, like, all right, you might never be in this position for 30 days, but then same thing in the classroom almost, you might never have this question until the final exam. Anything we can do to build that up?
Yeah. I mean, it's such an interesting question. The first thing that, I think one of the funny things about preparation is, Bobby Knight has this great phrase that everyone has the will to win, only some people have the will to prepare to win. I think about that with coaches too, that I think that one of the reasons that preparation gets a bad name is because people think that it will prevent them from being responsive and flexible and reacting to like what the learners reveal that they need. And interestingly, I think it's the opposite. When I was a young teacher, someone used the phrase over-prepare to under-prepare, which is if you have a really clear plan in your head, then your mind can be, your working memory can be free to observe what's happening. Is this the right plan? Are they learning what I thought they would learn from it? Do I need to make some adaptation? And so but if you're not really clear in your plan, what am I going to be doing next for how long? And you're trying to think of that, prepare for it while you're doing something else, your working memory is not free enough to be able to really observe what's happening to learners. And I think that is one of the most important and most overlooked parts of roles of coaching is just watching, right? We don't really think of ourselves as coaching when we're watching, but it's such an important part of the job. And so I think if I've prepared really well, I know what I'm doing next. I know what I plan to do next. Then I don't have to be thinking about it. So many times where I would observe soccer practices and a coach would be running a drill. This is actually a literal example. Coach is out on the field and he tells a group of players, when you're in the midfield and the outside back has the ball, I want to see you make instead of running right to her, I want to see you check away first, which is take a counter step or a jab step away to unweight your defender. And then I want to see you change speeds and check back towards the player with the ball. So we're doing a passing sequence. Let me see you do that now, go. So now I'm watching, and of the 10 girls that go through the cycle where they're supposed to be taking this counter step, maybe one of them even does it. They just don't do what the coach asked them to do, and he simply does not notice. So then he says, pause, great, that was good. Now let's talk about so why did he fail to see something that's in plain sight? A big part of it is because he's thinking about what is the next round that I'm going to run, right? What's the next step after the right? He's not able to focus his very scarce working memory on just watching for that thing. And if he'd watched for it, it would have been incredibly obvious. But I think this happens and I don't mean this as a judgment on him because he's a really good coach. Let the person who this has not happened to, yesterday we have a dog. We're trying to train her. And we came in the house and she's jumping up on me and my wife says tell her to sit. And I'm sit. And then I said, because I love her, I'm good dog. And she was she didn't actually sit. And I didn't even know it. She was right there. I told her to do one thing. I'm staring right at her. I did not know it. I'm so looking forward to rewarding her because I love that dog that she didn't do what I asked her to do. It's the easiest thing for a human to do is simply not see the follow through. And I think that's because we're not present in observation. And preparation, interestingly, being really clear on what your next steps are is interestingly one of the best ways to make yourself free your working memory to observe better and therefore to be reactive in a strange way. So you plan really well, but then sometimes you're going to tear up the plan. But you're actually more likely to tear up the plan productively if you've made a really good plan. if you're good at it. There's always the risk that you make a really good plan and now you're like wedded to my beautiful plan and I cannot, but like for a good coach, a good plan makes it easier to us to be like, it's a good plan, but it's the wrong plan.
Great answer. Because we do spend so much time on our plan, but then it does go awry. And then it's a battle of wills. Like, am I going to stick to the plan? You know what I mean? Or I'm not going to address the issue. So it takes a great deal of patience.
Yeah.
So what is your suggestion to the coach? Like, how much time do I give to this? Like, where do I make that say, okay, we got to move on? What's your suggestion?
I mean, I've given a lot of really long answers. The short answer to that was, I don't know. It's like it's a judgment call. And, sometimes it's okay to be like, this is not the most important thing. I'm going to make a note of it. I think one of the most important things is, I was watching, I'll spare you the story and maybe come back to it. I think one of the coaches often face a use it or lose it dilemma, which is I notice something and I either can act on it right now, I can shout something at you in the moment, or I can ignore it and it evaporates into the ether. So the story I was going to tell is actually about an NBA team at Summer League, and there are probably 10 coaches in the gym, and there are, 10 guys on the floor. And so literally like every time someone touches the ball, 3 guys are yelling at him. And the head coach is like, how do I discipline this environment from a feedback perspective? So like everyone is always yelling everything at me. So I can my message, we have a defense to install. I need to be clear on what the most important thing comes through. And what he did ultimately was give all of his coaches notebooks. 2 things, he gave them notebooks and he gave them observation tasks. So the notebook is a way of if I see something, now I have a choice. I can write it down and I can talk to you about it later. So I don't have the use it or lose it choice. And so it could be that we go on with the plan as we thought. We're not gonna tear up the plan for this one because it's one guy, and I think I can pick this up later. And in 5 minutes after practice, I can show you what it means to take a counter step. And then the other thing I think is really powerful there is that, if everybody's watching for everything, everyone feels like they should be shouting about everything, or that, if everyone's watching for everything, no one's looking for anything. And so he was just with his assistant coaches generally I think are very underutilized, giving them an observation task. Will you watch for how good our counter step is during this life? Who's doing it well? How often do we do it? What do we need to change about it? And if his only job is just to watch for that, in that pause, Coach Teeden, what'd you see? What do we need to work on by the counter? Or before I pause, what'd you see, Coach Teeden? Are we good at the counter step? Are we ready to move on? Do we need to go back to it? If we need to go back to it, what do we need to improve on it? So at least I'm I have really good information. I can tell you, I have a fascinating story about this with a rugby team. I can tell you if you want to about them trying to make a very simple change and how hard it was for them to observe for it. There.
I love it because all this stuff has got me pumped up because there obviously are scenarios that I've gone through before and currently are sometimes with assistant coaches and carry on.
So this is a story from this is a team I'm working with. They're preparing for the Rugby World Cup. Their last preliminary match, they're playing the number 1 team in the world, and they have this really great player who's he plays the equivalent in rugby. He's the quarterback, and he's probably the best player in the world. So their strategy for him is in rugby, when someone gets tackled, there's a ruck. It's kind of like the line of scrimmage, except it's fluid. There's not a set play, but imagine a center or guard and a tackle on either side of the ball. And what they decided they're going to do is they're going to fire on both sides of the ruck, which is the defensive ends basically are going to try and actively take 3 steps of field and compress the space so this guy can't, run them to death. This is a really, really simple change tactically in the game of rugby. It's just take your steps aggressively and fast and make sure you're doing it on the weak side as opposed we'd always do that on the strong side. We might not do it on the weak side on every occasion. So I can show you the film session where they're sitting down, they're talking about it, and everybody in the room understands that the primary tactical strategy is to fire on both sides of the ruck. They walk out in practice, they run the practice. Afterwards, the head coach said, he does a really great thing. At the end of every session, he circles up the coaches and he does a after action debrief, and he said, how'd we do today? So he asked the coach who ran the defensive drill, how do you think we did at firing on both sides of the ruck? So defensive coach is pretty good. Think we did pretty good, right? Of course he says that. He ran the drill. He's subjective, but he's also retrospective. Like, he wasn't watching the whole time for firing on both sides. So now he's trying to remember something that he wasn't really looking for, and he's a deeply vested interest in like accomplishing. So of course he's like, we're doing it. And for whatever reason, the head coach was skeptical of the guy. He just didn't think he did, whatever. He was like, afterwards, he's like, what do you think? It's like, I really don't know, but why don't we just appoint someone tomorrow, and their only job, one of your coaches, will be to watch whether we're firing on both sides of the rough. So the next day, they run the exercise again. There's a coach, all he's doing is watching, and midway through practice, he's like, 20% of the time, we are firing on both sides of the rock 20% of the time. Everyone knows that this is the primary tactical thing we're trying to do. Everyone discussed it, and all the coaches think it's happening, and it's happening 20% of the time. But the amazing thing that I'm noticing is, as this one guy's watching for firing on both sides of the rock, it's really hard for him to sustain his focus on just watching for it. And half the time he's shouting at the backs or shouting at some guy across the field, because it's kind of boring to watch for firing up all practice long, and he wants to add value. So he's actually only doing it about 50% of the time. So on day 3, we appoint 2 guys. This is the most important tactical change. So they have a big staff. So 2 guys, their job is to watch for firing on both sides of the rock. The first guy is like live feeding data to the second guy, who's got a clipboard and he's writing it down. And in this case, because it's like, World Cup, he's radioing it into the head coach who's running the program. He's like, Teeden and Willis, like they're killing it, and Lemov, he's terrible, whatever that, So they're feeding live information into him. But having the second guy tracking data from the first guy disciplines the first guy, and the quality of information that they're developing is all of a sudden really good. They're like, it's the weak side that's the problem. It's these 3 players that's the problem. It's these type of plays that are the problem. So now they're up at like 60%, but now they're like generating deep information about what the problem is. By the last day, before game day, they finally get it to 80%. But it's like, it is so hard to just watch for something very, very simple. And in some ways, all the incentives are against it. But I think these systems of like, we're actually going to like write down, we're going to track the data, and I'm going to assign people tasks for what if I'm serious about something happening, someone has to be watching for it or looking for it, or we're not going to know whether it's happening or not.
Yeah, you get what you emphasize, right? That's whatever that saying is. There's a saying out there for that. So we were talking to Dusty May, who I know you had conversation with him a while back. Great guy. I mean, so we're pretty proud of him, because when he was at FAU, he was on our podcast. Then all of a sudden he gets hired at Michigan. We know we were the catapult for him just being on our podcast. So big things are going to happen for you, Doug. So just seeing that.
That's great.
Yeah. But
always
he
wanted to have
mentioned
my program.
There you go. So he mentioned working with you in video. I'm a big video guy. I'm trying to refine it based on the generation we live in with how they live on short snippets. You go in the video room 15 minutes for practice, 30 minutes for practice, 5 minutes for practice, during practice. Do you have any thoughts on some ideal ways to utilize video in our practices?
Yeah, it's such a good question, because the average, I assume this is increasingly true of youth athletes also, but the average professional athlete, average collegiate athlete spends far more time watching video than they do actually on the court. It's a couple of thoughts. One of the things I think most important things to recognize is, by the time you show a video to a player, you have seen it 6 times, 8 times, right? You've watched it over and over and over, and they're seeing it for the very first time. So you put the video up on the screen, and you're like, does everyone notice our defensive spacing? And the answer to that is like, well, you've watched it 5 times. It's a great example of defensive spacing. You've chosen for that, and they're just like, is that me out there? Is this is this the play where I get smoked? So show it more than once. Like, I might be like, let's watch it once, watch what happens, then let's watch it again more carefully and a little bit more slowly. So players get one watch just to kind of orient themselves. They also watch more slowly than you do, right? You're an expert and they're novices, so you process quickly and they need to see it a couple times. Then I think orienting attention. So I might be like, watch it once, pay attention to our defensive spacing, then we'll watch it again and I'll ask you some questions about it. So right there, they literally could be watching anything. So always orienting players, there are always 15 stories happening in a video, at least, orienting their attention to like, what's the most important one. I don't have to tell them what to think about, like, our defensive spacing is good here. In fact, I would want them to figure out whether it's good, but just orienting their attention. The third thing I think is like one of the most important things about video is a tool to develop players' eyes. and visual perception is vastly underrated in decision making, right? You can't make a decision about something you don't see. For the most part, experts are good decision makers because they're looking at the right things. They understand what the cues are that tell them drive or pass. So I think I especially want to use video as a way to build up players' visual capacity to understand cues that may be going slow at first. So to me, the most important part of a video is what I would call the pause point, which is rather than showing the video and then going to a blue screen and being like, boys, what do you see? Like, I should show it to the point where the visual cue happens. Pause. And while they're actually looking at the visual cue, what do you notice about the spacing of the defense? What does it tell us we should be thinking about here? And then the last thing I would say is that, like, there's really clear evidence that there are memory benefits to self-generation, which is as soon as I start talking to someone about it or writing about it, it helps me to encode better. So if I pause, what do you notice about the defensive spacing here? 30 seconds to talk to your teammate. What do you notice? Go. Or 30 seconds to sketch what we look like in our shell and to make one note in your sketch about something we should change. Go, right? Just that active processing gives players the opportunity to process it and learn, and probably results in their getting more out of it. Do you think that means probably showing less video? But I think it's actually more interesting for players and probably results in more learning. So I think those are some just like video basics that I think are really
Typically, like a session, what length of time probably the most beneficial?
I mean, in terms of a meeting or in terms of a video?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, the meeting. If I have a whole group, is it more beneficial to have, maybe a small group, 3 or 4 guys, or, a whole team session as well?
I think you can and probably have to do both, right? There are times when we're just talking about a position group, and there's sometimes when the whole team needs to be there. I would just say this is the most frequent question I get asked, which is how long can players be in a meeting for? And I think it's a really interesting question, but it also, it often, there has to be a limit, right? But oftentimes we're asking that question because we're reading players' reaction, which is they look bored, they look disinterested. And that's real, especially in just a culture of fractured attention. But I think if we can make the meeting, if it can light players' minds on fire and they can feel like they're learning and they're more actively engaged in talking to their team, if we can make it more interesting, then we can stretch the limit for, we can go from 10 minutes to 12 minutes or 10 minutes to 15 minutes and potentially get, 20% more out of it. So I would say experiment with meeting length. I could also break it up into shorter meetings, more, there's a lot of just in terms of research on retrieval practice, right? 5 minutes before, 5 minutes in the middle at a water break, and 5 minutes at the end might be better than 20 minutes at the outset. But also experimenting with different teaching methodologies to engage players more can often allow me just to stretch it a little bit and have players, if they're happy, I can go longer and they're probably learning more.
What if I
Maybe
send
not
them,
happy, I would say curious and active and learning well.
what if I send them a clip of something and I say, what did you see here? But I also am trying to do where it's okay to make a mistake, the culture of error. I want to, would it be something like, don't respond for 5 minutes?
Yeah.
I send you this video. Tell me what you were thinking here, or tell me what you think here. Don't respond for 5 minutes. Would that make sense, or does it matter?
First of all, I really like the idea of pre-sending players video. Maybe Billy, to your question, which is a good way to shorten the meeting, would be I'm going to send you the videos that we're going to be watching in advance. I want you to watch them. We'll come in and I'll be great, here's the first video. I'll show it to you again just to remind you, but after the video, either Billy, I'm going to ask you to tell me about it, or maybe if players have texted me ideas, I'm going to be Billy, you texted me something really interesting about this video, so I want you to start us off talking about it, which I think just honors the player for having done their homework and having thought deeply about it. And so to me, that's a cold call, but it's an honor list. I want you to start the conversation. I think it's really important, Jody, just you pointing out culture of error. I think what I want to say there is get us started, right? As opposed to tell us the answer. Because get us started implies you don't have to be perfect. And it also cues the rest of the team to be listening carefully so that they can build off of that player's answer. And then I think that so I love the idea of sending players video in advance. I think it's useful to have them. If you feel like they're rushing, I do want to slow them down. So I might say something like, make sure you watch it twice before you send me your thought. Watch it once, then watch for this, and then text me like one insight. I'll choose some of your thoughts to start the meeting on Tuesday or something like. Just they have an incentive not to rush if they know that I'm reading it carefully, and I might ask them to talk about it. And I might even tell them like there'll be a point in when we have to do film quickly, but here the point is to go slow and take your time and really look carefully for the things that are important, so don't rush.
Now, segueing that video to a scouting purpose.
Yeah.
Now, how, and again, I've been referencing other shows you've been on, but the video camera, and I did the measurements for the camera in our gym, is approximately 200 feet away from the action, and it's following the ball through advanced or artificial intelligence. So going into scouting, similar ways to approach the video, or do we need to take another step in terms of like learning, hey, when you see this cue, this is what's going to happen, stuff like that?
When you say scouting, you mean showing players video of their next opponent?
Preparation. Yeah. Preparation.
This is a place where I think you probably know a lot more than I do. Well, actually, all the things. It's probably know more, a lot more. But I think that I don't know what the right balance would be between, we have a way that we weigh the game model and a way that we want to play. And if we play our game, then, we're not going to worry too much about what the opposition is going to do versus we're going to really prepare for the opposition and understand their tendencies. Or some middle ground of what a lot of coaches tell me is that 80% of the game model is my goal is to get my guys really fluid at understanding our game model. And then 20% is small adaptations to things that we see the opposition doing. And then I think there's a question of, and I don't know the answer to that question, but I'd like to hear your answer. Then the other thing is, I think, am I just trying to get players used to observing players' tendencies? What do you know? Just having them watch carefully to be by the time a guy, attacks me on the dribble, I've actually watched him 4 or 5 times. So I've started to, to pick up on some of his body cues, or do I want them to really be thinking about tactical things? Is it visual intelligence or tactics that I'm trying to build? And again, the answer to all those questions is, I don't know, but I'd love to hear how you think about it.
I'm a guy that's at the school level. It was always about tendencies, because we really have time. We're playing Tuesday night, we're falling back. I'm playing Wednesday night. So a detailed scout over an opponent, it would be miserable if I was playing 2 really quality teams that run a bunch of sets back-to-back nights. So, I was a tendency guy. So I'm curious to where Joe stands.
Same thing. I mean, Billy, we did it this week. I asked you had watched a kid play, and I said, you told me this kid only goes left. And so I'm able to relay that information to the player that was kind of tasked with guarding him. And then you then allow the guy who might come in later that's going to guard him to be all right, you see what Doug's doing? Doug's sitting on that kid's left hand, and he's going to go, he's going that direction. So then when you go in, I would like you to try to do the same thing. Again, not going to be perfect, and then, so those are the tendencies that we're looking for, and some cues, if they do this is what they're looking for, but not getting too far out of what we do in terms of how we're going to defend different actions. But just like you said too, also getting them familiar with, they're not shocked when oh, wow, I didn't have any idea this kid could do this or could do that. Yeah.
So much of what we learn is a lot of the visual learning that we do kind of skips our working memory. We're not as aware of what we're processing. I won't bore you with the fascinating monkey versus human study, the chimpanzee versus human study that would be. But humans basically, they over imitate, right? They're just really attuned to learning things from visual environment. So I think that if I've seen a guy, just a bunch of times, I'm going to start to, it's almost like AI. I'm going to start to generate, just knowledge and familiarity with them, and I won't be starting at square one. I think that can be really helpful for players. It would strike me that the camera angle would be really important. That one of the it's so hard what we ask players to do when we ask them to learn from video, right? you pointed out, like, the camera's in the corner of the gym. It's 50 feet above the floor and in a corner. And I'm asking you to take that information from that angle and turn it into a reading of a visual cue that you make from the floor level, 3 feet from the guy, with him attacking you. Like, that's actually a really cognitively difficult thing to do, to make that, to translate the visual information from one perspective to a very different perspective and setting. So one thing I might think about is just camera angle. How can I get the camera lower? And
Yeah, that's a good point.
There's a really fascinating story about during COVID, one of the American world-class skiers, they weren't able to go out. They weren't able to go out and ski they were skiing like a course in Slovenia, and usually you go out a couple of days earlier and you ski the course a bunch of times to just develop your visual familiarity with it. And they weren't able to get out for whatever reason beforehand. So she sent someone else out with a GoPro to ski the course for her, so she'd be visually familiar with it. And it turned out that it didn't work, because the GoPro mounted on the other skier's helmet was 4 inches higher than her eye level was when she saw the course. And so she'd watch videos of an entirely different course, just
Wow.
like that very small difference in camera angle made the...
How many inches? Like 4?
I mean, so whatever, that
Yeah. Like, it's crazy that our brain could, that's a difference. Like, that's such a cognitive difference. Wow.
I mean, skiing, and also, skiing might be like especially particular about where the angle might be hugely. But
I have no idea.
Yeah.
Doug, I wanted to ask you, because I ask this question quite a bit, and I love to hear people's answers to this. Can coaches develop leaders, or is that
It's a really great question. I believe that the answer is yes. That, I believe that the answer is yes, and that actually that's a big part of what we're doing when we're coaching. That that the sport is important and we love the sport, but the sport isn't oftentimes a Trojan horse for character leadership. So first of all, I don't want to believe it. Well, true. So that should make you skeptical of my answer, but I do, because I think one of what's an interesting principle of cognitive psychology is the fundamental attribution error, which is when we see other people doing things, we assume that it's for some personal element of their character, but actually oftentimes what they're doing is just reacting to the environment. That some people are great leaders in one environment and they're not leaders at all in a different environment, which tells me that something about different environmental cues can cause someone to become a different person. When people ask me to, take personality tests and answer, like, do you like to do this or do you like to do that? I'm like, well, it really depends on who's in the room. When you ask me that, am I an extrovert or an introvert? It depends on, what we're talking about, who's in the room, I'm skeptical of fixity of personality trait. I think that people become who they are based on their reading of the cues and the ways that the environment tacitly socializes them. And I think one of the most beautiful moments in sports is the quiet kid who doesn't think of himself as a leader emerges as a leader because a coach sees it in him, and is I want you to try and step up and do this. And then you find out that you can. I think one, I think that's true, but two, I'm very compelled by it. So I want to believe it's true. What's your answer to the question?
I'm with you. I agree. Now, I've had players, and obviously, and it's funny you mentioned the environment, because I've had players in the basketball environment who were very good leaders, but they were outside with another set of friends. They were different people. That affected them going back into our environment. You know what I mean? Because kids fall.
Or a kid's a great leader, and then when another kid shows up, and it just changes the chemistry a little bit, and suddenly he's, or vice versa, or he's not a great leader, and your best player leaves, and he has to step up, and it turns out that I just think that it's such a calculus of people are so socially attuned to the rules of group formation that
it's interesting. Developing your team and who you have around your kids is just as important as having the talent. You can have a really good talented player, but someone else that's bringing them down or whatever. It's just, I'm with you. Who want to believe that I can build the leaders, and I feel disappointed, or like I haven't done my job when I don't develop that person. And I don't want to say, oh, well, I don't have a leader. I do feel that's my responsibility.
Yeah.
Well, my thing too is I do know that there are people that don't want to be leaders, and that's hard to stomach too, because you see a guy like Kevin Durant, right? Top player in the world, doesn't want to be a leader on his team. And now he'll work harder than anybody out there. He'll play hard, but he just doesn't want to be a leader. And, and that's the hard part, because you want guys to be a leader. Doug, I know you got to get out of here. The last one I want to hit you with, how you are consuming so much information and you're putting it out there. And I love it. I try to read every one that you put out. How are you consuming all this stuff? How are you taking it in? Podcasts, reading, books? I mean, you're doing your own books, you're doing podcasts.
Well, you're really nice to say that, because I feel like I'm losing that path sometimes. But I listen to a lot of podcasts. I try and do it when I'm walking. So I walk to work a couple of times a week. So I just like put on a podcast, and I find that just like my body motion allows me to concentrate better. And I do really believe in just like forcing myself to concentrate on things for sustained periods of time. I think one of the reasons why basketball is such a joy for players is because you enter this flow state that like you lose track of time when you're on the court, and suddenly you like look up and it's like 40 minutes have elapsed. Like I think interestingly, that's one of the most pleasurable states for a human being to be in. So I try and make my intellectual work get into those flow states as well. So I will, like I often walk when I'm listening to podcasts. When I'm reading, I try and discipline myself to like be in a pleasant place and read for 40 minutes at a stretch. But the other thing about reading that I realized is how much of what I read I'd never encoded. And so I have a little journal that I keep. It's just it's a reader's journal. And when I go through, so when I read, I force myself to like underline stuff and star stuff. But then I had this experience where I have this bookshelf in my office where I put books that I read that I find like really profoundly meaningful. And so I was in my office the other day, and I walked by this one book that I read like a year ago or something. I put it on my shelf because it was so meaningful to me, and I walked by it, and I was like, I could not remember anything about that book. Like all I remember is that I loved it. It's gone. So I started keeping this journal where after I finished a book, I just forced myself to go through and handwrite, 5 or 10 things that I find really meaningful and really important that I want to remember. Even if I never go back and read that book, the act of handwriting it. And by the way, I think all the research is really clear that handwriting is much better than typing. Typing is fast. So when you're taking notes when you're typing, you're basically like making a record of what everyone says. But when you write, you have to write slowly. So you have to like prioritize and really think deeply about what you're trying to write. So I just try and discipline myself to like write 2 pages of notes. I don't even try and like write about what they mean to me, though you could just like literally transcribe the quote. It helps me to remember them and remember what I took. Because I think in retrospect, I waste a lot of the reading that I did. I never learned anything from it. I read this fascinating thing about, maybe it was Harry S. Truman or something, where he's like a young man and he's reading a book and he says, I've read it 3 times now and I'm almost ready to master it. When was the last time? Like someone in our culture read a book 3 times because they wanted to master it? But I do think that I'm oftentimes lazy with my reading. So I'm trying to have this process to try and de-lazy myself.
I'm right there with you, man. But I mean, the only one that probably reads like that is like Ryan Holiday or somebody like that needs to like lock it in, like in the way he does it. But man, I know, I imagine all the shows you're on and the shows you do, you could keep going and we could keep going. But I actually have a game tonight, and I know I got to I'll take my family with me, and you got family stuff. But Doug, this is amazing, man. And you should put your bookshelf on social media and let people see if they got the same stuff from it as you did. So we appreciate you being on.
Hey, I really enjoyed it. Thanks. It was great. It was a great conversation, and good luck tonight.
Thanks, man.